Welcome to the Hangout Podcast. I'm your host, David Sharetta. Come on in and hang out. In this episode, I was privileged to have a conversation with Patrick Larkin. Patrick Larkin is a veteran school administrator. Before being a school leader in various capacities, which he's done for nearly 30 years, he was also a teacher. Before that, he was a coach and a substitute teacher. And before that, a sports writer. So Patrick and I cover a lot of ground in this conversation. He talks about his use of technology, blogging, podcasting, etc., in expressing his views, in leading within a community. Patrick's approach is humble, thoughtful, nuanced, and refreshing. I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Welcome, Patrick. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for a conversation.
Thanks for having me.
I thought we could start where we start with all of these conversations, which is with your origin story, where you come from and how that informs who you are today, the work you do, the beliefs you hold.
Yeah, no, I think that's important. So I grew up in central Massachusetts in a town called Mendon, a small town, suburb of Boston. And my mother was a school teacher, so education became, something that was really in my world from an early days. And then remember going to school with her, as a little kid and hanging out in her classroom. And it was always a fun place to be. School was always a good place for me. And then when I was in seventh grade, I lost my dad to suicide, and school became even more important for me because it filled some voids for me, like time, constructive time, wasn't rushing home all the time. And there were a lot of, male teachers that kind of filled some voids for me. And, and I was just very fortunate to be in a place a small school where everybody knew who I was. And I'm sure I didn't realize it at the time, but I know people paid extra attention because, they were worried, and people know my mom was a teacher, not in the same place. And so I feel fortunate, and that definitely impacted, I think, me landing in education. I went to a small school in Worcester, Mass. Called Assumption College from there, now Assumption University. And they didn't have a secondary ed program at the time. And so I ended up dabbling in elementary education. But as a 19-year-old going to an elementary school and having all the little kids surrounding me, I was a little over my head at that point. Like, they were very clingy, and I just, as a 19-year-old, didn't have a lot of experience working with a lot of young kids. I had experience coaching older kids. So I ended up kind of pulling back a little bit. I ended up being a sports writer for a little while for a local paper out of college. And then one of those mentors I mentioned from my high school days, my high school baseball coach, called me, and he's like, "Hey, we need a baseball coach over here at another local school to coach the freshman team. I think you'd be great." So I started coaching the freshman baseball team. And from there, I'm like, I love doing this. I need to find a way to be in schools more often. And I started as a substitute teacher, which I loved. And I think if you love being a substitute teacher, it can be a challenging job because you're in a different room every day, never really know what you're getting, and it's not your classroom. I knew if I could go back and get the final few classes I need to become a high school teacher, have my own classroom, maybe do some coaching, I'm like, this is going to be a pretty good deal for me. And so that's what I did.
So it's interesting, we thank you for that. And it's when you underline the fact that this role of the school as an anchor in kids' lives, I think so often that can get lost in just the daily stressors of education, right? Just all the demands on educators and the requirements and the standards and everything else. But it sounds like your life has been just a real example of that anchoring, stabilizing force when your family goes through tragedy.
Yeah, Definitely. Like the school for a lot of the kids, I think I was a pretty good student, and you know, I don't think a lot of the trauma that may have been in the background there necessarily came out in classroom settings or anywhere, but I know I hope it makes me more attuned, like, when kids are coming to school and things are happening, like there's a behavioral issue, everybody will say a behavior is kids are telling you their feelings, there's something going on. And just to not to take things personally and to like find out their story, like get to know the kids. And just kids are going through a lot. And so I do hope, I like to think that my background story helps me have a little more empathy and pry a little and try to get to know students. And certainly, unfortunately, I've been involved like in the years, like having families lose kids the same way that we lost my dad, and having kids lose parents. And like certainly those families you feel an instant bond to, just because it's kind of a lonely existence. But yeah, I do like to think it makes me more sensitive, but I'm sure there's times where I fall short of that too, like we all do.
So you had a little bit of a detour, it sounds like, as a sports writer.
Yeah, yeah, I
Um,
did.
yeah, how talk about that a little bit, because that's I'm always intrigued by those things. Yeah, I come from a family of educators, and I tried my damnedest to get out of being an educator for a little bit. So,
Yeah, so at Assumption, I started out as a social studies major, and there was this one social studies class where there were no tests, but you had to write papers, was like your all your assessments were papers. And then after my freshman year was done, that was one of the classes I looked at my grades and I'm like, I'm doing way better in my English classes. Not that I was doing poorly in my social studies class, but my English grades were really strong. And I'm like, I just changed my major. And then when I dropped the double major, I went to a minor in education. I'm like, well, what can I do here? And I think another thing that like losing my dad, my brother and I were sports nuts. Like I kind of lost myself in sports,
mm,
and it probably played a really significant role for me. Like, and then I got into sports writing, which I liked. It was cool. I got to be in the Celtics locker room. I got to be in the Patriots locker room. I got to be in the Bruins locker room. Um, Not the Red Sox because the editor of the paper covered the Red Sox and that was his deal. Um, but anyway, when you're doing it for a job day to day, it's like, it's like one of those things where don't let your hobby be your job or something. Um, Kind of rang true. I'm like, and I looked around the newsroom like one night because it was in the days where we have to go into the office and
yeah.
do our work, or maybe you could put an old fashioned modem over your phone and send the article in, but it was just easier to be in the office. So I'm looking around like at like 1 a.m. taking the train back from Boston after a Bruins game, and I'm like, when I'm 35, do I want to be here? Or in my head, I'm like, what would be like a step up? I'm like, maybe I could write for the Boston Globe someday. That was like our big local sports paper
Right.
where phenomenal Peter Gammons and Dan Shaughnessy and Will
Yeah.
McDonough, like these crazy good, like well-known nationally writers. And I'm like, you know what? Like even at 35, if I could be at the Globe, I'm not saying I could have ever gotten there. I'm like, I don't think that's the pathway I want to take. So shortly thereafter, the call came in about the coaching opportunity. And as soon as I started coaching, I'm like, got to get more in the school day to day. And so I started subbing at my old high school. And again, it was funny. The high school that I went to, I became a sub, got a permanent teaching job. Then a few years down the road, I became a assistant principal in the school I went to, which was kind of interesting because I was, the evaluator for some of the teachers I had when I was a high school student. So
Wow.
it was a really interesting experience, but it was all good.
So what is your role right now? Because I know
Yeah.
you've had classroom, admin, etc.
Yeah, I did the math this week, and it's year 29 in school administration for me.
Wow.
So I started as an assistant principal at Nipmuc Regional High School. That's the school I attended as a student. I was there for 7 years. And then I remember somebody coming into the office and they're like, "What are you still doing here?" It's like, meaning I should be going for a principal's job somewhere. I'm like, "Yeah, maybe it's time." So I ended up becoming a principal at a much larger school, Peabody High School in Peabody, Mass. It was a great experience for me. I was there for 3 years. There was a lot of turmoil politically. I think I had four superintendents in my 3 years as a
Nice.
principal, and I'm like, as my contract was coming to an end, I did get the offer to like extend it, but I was looking around and I had an opportunity to go down the road to this place called Burlington, Mass. And I was really fortunate to land there. I was principal there for 5 years. And then I did, I think it was 11 years in central office. And then, things happen. It's time to move on. So after 16 years there, I had some time to think about, I probably have 5 years left in that vicinity because of the way the retirement system works here. I'm not looking forward to not working in public schools in Massachusetts. I've loved every minute of it. But I had a chance to think about like what was my favorite position. And it was when I was an assistant principal, just because you're so connected to the kids and like you said, getting to know their stories and trying to help students that are struggling and being a support. And I really love that role. And so I had the chance to go to Lexington High, and I'm in my third year. And I love the model. We have 2,400 kids, and we have five deans of students, and I'm one of five deans. And we each run our own student support team. So we have our own counselors we work with, social worker, nurse. And I really love the model, how we're able to like get together as a group of educators and see what kids need our support and try to put supports in place. And again, I've been blessed, honestly. Like I feel like every step along the way has been the right step. So I really have no complaints. I really feel blessed about where education has brought me from point A to point B to the next spot.
In such a hierarchical profession, right? Like
Yeah.
ours, even if we pretend like it's not, we know
Yeah.
it is. There's lines that you cross, and then you're on the other side, or some people say you're on the dark side, depending, right?
Yeah.
Um, how did you manage that transition that some people would call a step down? You obviously didn't see it that way because sounds like your whole journey's been a step up in your experience with kids, but you moved from a central office to, eventually now you're in a dean role and loving it. How did you kind of manage that, and maybe talk a little bit about how those peer interactions, colleague interactions went too?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. It is a lot different. You don't understand till you're there. Um, in those positions that it's a little different. Uh, my first assistant principal's job, I do think I was fortunate because it was in this place I grew up in, and I think my relationships were strong with people, so there was never really any big problem. Obviously, it's you come across people that are like, do I need a union rep in this conversation? Or
Yeah.
I honestly think it's all about relationships. I think the higher you go up, like from assistant principal to principal, you're dealing more with adult issues at that point. You're dealing with maybe a few staff issues, but a lot of parents that have concerns or want certain things for their kids. And then another step up at assistant superintendent, it's even more of that. It's more disconnected from kids, dealing with, union representation about things in schools. And again, just like people that aren't happy with what the principal said and are now coming to central office. And then I never really aspired to be a superintendent. I feel like I was fortunate. I worked in a central office where I had a pretty good voice in decisions when the superintendent was, he let me work closely with him. And so I feel like I had a lot of voice in decisions that were made. And yeah, I mean, I don't see it as ego. It's more like I don't feel you have the same impact on kids in that position. That's my feeling. And there's certainly district and building leaders that are able to do things in their buildings that maybe they make big policy changes or are able to change practices in their building or district, and it impacts kids in a positive way. Um, that wasn't my experience in those leadership roles. I felt at some point, and maybe this was a me problem, I became just part of the system. Like maybe there's some comfort that comes in, and like I felt like I could sit, not sit back and do nothing, but you could just do business the way business has been done and go through your career. Or I I felt like there were changes to be made, and the changes may not have been happening. So I'm like, where can I have an impact? And I'm like, let's go work with individual kids. And yeah, not every situation will be a success, but I know at the end of the week, end of the semester, end of the year, I'll be able to at least put my hands on, a couple of decisions and say like, yeah, I think I helped with a positive outcome there. And I think, I don't know, the higher I went up, I don't think that I felt the same way about that, and didn't have those same relationships. Like that's in the classroom where you work with a kid one on one and you're like, oh, we made a great connection. I helped this student see something in themselves. And I feel like, I pushed this thing forward positively. And at the end of the day or the end of the year, sometimes with administration, like with the higher administration positions, I didn't always feel that way. And again, that certainly is something I need to think about. Maybe I was over my head in these positions. I don't know, but it felt the right thing to do and go back and work with kids. And so I haven't 1 second of it. I was 100% right, like in what I remembered about being in that role.
What are your biggest challenges? It sounds like what you relish about your role is that you have the opportunity to work really closely with, I'm assuming, like 600 kids or so, right? It sounds
Yeah.
like
Yep.
approximately, which is a good number to be able to learn about their lives and their stories. What kind of challenges are you facing, and are they different from the challenges that you faced at the beginning of your career? Because you've been fortunate to be able to span, 2.5 decades in the profession.
This first answer, and if we go a follow up, maybe I'll
Yeah,
be specific about Lexington, but I want to be clear, like I'm not necessarily talking about uh, where I am right now in this
right.
answer.
Sure.
Um, but I think again, one of the things I became disenchanted with, and um, this answer kind of plays into my privilege and my background and growing up in upper middle class, predominantly
Right.
white community, that I wasn't aware of inequities that existed, and because I grew up in a place where there wasn't much difference. Like everybody was in this white suburb, and it was great. I'm not saying anything bad about that place that I grew up. I had a great upbringing, but as I got older and got to go to like more diverse settings, starting with Peabody, Burlington, Lexington, like you start to realize the inequities in the system, and not everybody's coming in with the same privileges. And when kids aren't doing as well, like are we making sure that there's equitable opportunities, equitable access? So I think that is like still a big challenge to make sure like we're looking at our policies and our practices to make sure that, whatever things are getting in the way of kids
Mhm.
being successful, like it's not something that we have in place that we've just become blind to. And I think again, all of these inequities that I think we come across or I've come across, they're not things that were consciously set up.
Mhm.
They're all set up with positive intent, but we can see clearly sometimes when we start to look at data that there's disproportionality in, whether it's special ed students, black and brown students, lower income students aren't doing as well. And if our policy or our practice plays a part in that, I think we need to be willing to take a look at that and look in the mirror. And I think sometimes it's not that we're not willing to do that. It's just that we're overwhelmed with like we don't know how to fix this. We've been doing this for so long that we just tend to ride out these bad practices or policies for too long. So I think that's like a big challenge that we have a lot of conversations about in my last three districts.
It's interesting, this concept of policy, right? Like there's one way to look at policy is, well, that's the policy, and so we need to follow it.
Yep.
And then I remember a professor of mine in a doctoral program, I think I probably made a comment like that in one of our discussions. And he said, you realize that policies are made by people and groups of people, and they can be changed by people. And so sometimes it's that also the beginner's mindset of when you switch to a different setting to be able to look at things with fresh eyes. I just interviewed a superintendent in New York who I think he's been 19 years in that district and 17 years as superintendent. And I asked him about like his blind spots, and he goes, "Well, one of them is I've just been here a really long time." And so it's like, in a way, it's like the toaster at home that the handle's kind of loose on it. And you just found a way to work around it because you're too busy to buy a new toaster. And but if someone comes in for the first time in your house, they're like, what the hell are you doing? Just get a new toaster. Oh yeah, you're right. And it's like looking at that. Was your experience in other settings? Because you've moved around, right? So were you able to bring that to your current role and like from an equity standpoint go, you know what? Can we look at this? Can we look at that? Do you have any concrete examples of that?
First of all, like I don't feel like one person can make these changes.
Right.
So the first step is finding some colleagues that are also of a like mind that are like, yeah, we need to change some things. So in Peabody, one of the things was I think we were a school of about 1,600 when I got there, if I remember correctly. It's been a while. And there was a lot of problems with freshman failure. Just some systems in place where freshmen weren't doing well out of the gate. And obviously when freshmen don't do well out of the gate, like the data is pretty bad if they're not getting enough credits to pass their freshman year. Their success rate for finishing high school drastically drops. So we were fortunate to get a federal grant called the Smaller Learning Communities Grant, which I don't think is around anymore. But we were able to kind of break down the high school, or at least for the freshmen, into more, I hate to say it because it's not the same, but kind of a team approach like you'd see in the middle school where the kids would have like the same core group of teachers and put this team in place. And again, that was when we got the grant. I think I saw it for a year, so I can't tell you like how things ended up, but that was like putting structures in place to do things a little bit differently. So that was an example of one thing that comes to mind.
It's interesting, the concept of when you work in settings like that. I'm assuming that your biggest challenge is change resistance on the part of adults, right? Like I was just reading in one of our team study sessions here at work, and we were reading about how the amygdala is a novelty detector. Yep. And so 50,000 years ago, it was really good about detecting sounds outside your cave, so you didn't go out there, right? And you got your spear ready. But now it's, hey, can I share some professional feedback with you? And suddenly your amygdala is going, danger, danger. How do you work through that inevitability, right? Because we all have it. I have it. You have it. We all have that reaction to change, to disruption, to breaking patterns that whether that's a pattern that we set or whether we inherited that.
Yeah. No, I've heard the same thing too. Like when you ask everybody, like who thinks we need to make some changes around here, everybody like puts their hand up, and then you're like, well, who wants to make changes themselves, like personally? And like nobody wants to say it's them, I mean, I was really fortunate again, like it's to be in a place with people that are willing to take some risks and understand that even if we fail at this change, just doing things the same way is not an option. Staying the same way is like the worst possible option. So like, let's take some risks. We're going to learn some things along the way, either way. So going to Burlington was a blessing. And when I was the principal at Burlington High, we were able to be one of the first one-to-one schools. I think we were the first one-to-one school in Massachusetts with iPads. So what we decided to do was every Wednesday, that first year, every Wednesday of the school year, we had what we called Walkthrough Wednesday, where any other local school could come and we did a little presentation in the morning, like, here's where we are. We haven't figured this all out yet, but like we thought it was really important for us to start to build a network. Like, here's a school, live kids, they all have these iPads. Like, you can, teachers let them walk through their classes. Um, but this is happening here and it's okay. Like, this, things aren't crazy. Like, people were overwhelmed with the idea of like, and now we're having conversations about banning cell phones in schools,
Cell
which is
phones. Yeah.
another one. But
Yeah.
and I have thoughts on that too.
Yeah.
But anyway, like we went one to one with iPads, and people were like, "How did you do that? Like, how did you get everybody on board?" And I'm like, "Who said I got everybody on board? It's never going to happen, you know." So what we tried to do was provide opportunities for people to learn. Like, yes, this is going to feel overwhelming at times. But Chris Lehman is a principal in Philadelphia at Science Leadership Academy, who's one of the most phenomenal principals I've seen. And he used to talk about like school is supposed to be preparation for the real world. And like, we can't have kids like come into school and like no access to like these devices. And then you go out into the real world and they're supposed to figure it out on their own. So we thought, the thought at the time was, with our watchful eye, like we can help them learn how to use these things constructively and not be distracted. And they're going to be using them for their learning, for the rest of their lives. So let's have these conversations and let's make it happen. And again, we were fortunate to do that, and I think we did a pretty good job. And it was again because we had a great team in place.
So where do you come down on? I actually had that on my list. I'm like, ask him about cell phones. So I hear, I ask a lot of educators about that, and California has mandated by June of 2026 that every district and charter LEA has a policy on cell phones. They suggest that you ban them, but they don't mandate it. I've heard everything from people using wander bags already to lock them up to people going, we're not banning anything. Where do you stand on that?
I mean, number one is I think it needs to be a community conversation. Like, I mean, one mistake we make is like saying every school's alike, all kids are alike, every community is alike. So I think there need to be thoughtful conversations involved. Where we are in Lexington is the kids, when they walk into the classroom, they put it in like one of those shoe tree, like a holder, and
Okay.
they're supposed to leave it there for the whole class. Even if they leave to take a restroom break, they're supposed to leave the phone there. So that's a work in progress. Where I stand is like I think things have changed. Like when we went one to one with iPads in Burlington, gosh, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago. I can't like it. We weren't in the same place. Like we didn't have such access to apps, and not every kid had their own computer at home. Never mind at school. So we just thought we were kind of leveling the playing field by doing some of this and giving teachers access to online resources in their classroom. Like everybody had access and so again, the things are moving so fast. I think the pandemic had something to do with this, but I feel like kids are more isolated than ever, even though they have access to these tools that can connect them with anybody anywhere. And I think there's a lot of conversations we need to have with one another, especially with, AI now involved in the mix. But I read an article in the Atlantic, I think it was like August 4th, about like they did surveys on kids. And I think the group that had surveyed the kids talked like, what we want you to put your phones away. Like, can you talk to us about this and like get some answers from the kids? And I think what they found was um, kids want independent opportunities to play with one another. Like some of these things that you probably had growing up, I know I did, was I could go out and play in my neighborhood by myself. I could go to the park and have a pickup wiffle ball game or a pickup baseball game. And everything is so programmed for kids nowadays. Everything is so organized. Like they don't have a chance to go out and build the same kind of social skills or have the same social opportunities. So it's weird, right? Like parents won't let the kids go out and play in the front yard alone, but they'll let them go up into their room on their phone or their iPad and they can connect with anybody in the world. Like it's a strange situation when you think about it. So I know there's communities that mentioned in that article where they're trying to develop that these places in communities where parents can drop kids off, like drop
Yeah.
them off at the playground and pick them up in a couple hours. So yeah, um, I think our kids need help from us. We spend so much time together in these spaces, and there's opportunities in school. We do like, what is it, 990 hours in Massachusetts with kids. And I think they're there, but they're not there because of the phones. Like they're so tied to these things. And um, so I do think from some of the things I've heard, it's just a few. And like schools where they tried this, I've heard interviews with kids on the local NPR station saying like, it was actually good. Like I talked to this kid I never would have talked to before, and like they're building relationships. And when I think about like why are our communities breaking down and like, we're either this or that, based on our, and it's, I think it's because we're not having these conversations. And like I think one of the most valuable things we could do for our kids is bring this back. Like let's, yeah, you don't think you have anything in common with that student. Like, let's have a conversation, and the way things are going right now, it's a little scary in the world, like what direction we're going to go. So I think the ability to just to have conversations with each other is more important than ever. And I think the phones take us away from that. Even adults, myself included. Like, I know I've had my moments, where this was certainly not recently, but like where I was worried about my responses on Twitter, and
Yeah, that's the interesting thing too, is that I know that overwhelmingly as a group, at least nationally, teachers are strong advocates. Teacher unions are strong advocates for restricting and or banning cell phones. I think it's the enforcement piece is tricky, right? Because does it turn every teacher into an enforcement agent? Does that become an oppositional relationship all over the place? That's kind of an open question. How do we as adults behave with our own technology? Right? Are we only using it for work? Like, or are we, like, I don't know how much Amazon shopping is going on in any district in any on in anywhere in the United States, right? Like, so it's a tricky conversation.
it is. Yeah, when we're and I don't think there's any perfect answer, but like I said, I think communities need to have these conversations because certainly some of the research, the stuff we're seeing about how our kids are doing mentally right now is not good. And I think the phones play a huge part in that.
So we talked about the role that writing has had in your past, and I learned about you through a profile in a district administration education influencers list. Talk to us about your writing in terms of you know philosophical and practical stances in education, right, and how those are connected to your teaching.
I think the reason I got into the writing, or I was looking for an outlet for my writing as an administrator, was to share. And like again, the idea wasn't to share to say, look at me, like we're doing we're the best school ever, we're doing the best work, like you need to see this. It was more about like sharing experiences and getting feedback from other people and starting to build a network. So I was really fortunate to be in these positions. Like I said, when we went one to one, I had a big social media network with educators back at the time where like that was kind of a new thing. I started a blog called the BHS Principals blog when I was principal at Burlington High, and like blogged routinely, probably at least every other day, if not more. And just it was a time where people would make comments, reach out, and um, there was a huge edu blogger network, and it was just timing, really, honestly, and a willingness to share. And like I still think it's so important that we learn from one another. It's still amazing to me that we have these tools to connect each other and learn from each other and network. But I still feel like we don't share a lot, school to school. I don't know if that's conscious or is like we're afraid to share or we don't want to give away secrets or what it is, but um, I forget who said it. There was this quote I heard once that said, "The smartest person in the room is the room," meaning like the more
Mhm.
people we bring together, like the better the ideas are going to be. Um, And so I just was trying to take advantage of tools to like put out my ideas, and then so many times people came back and I was able to make them better because of things that, people in that network would share with me. So I guess really big on collaboration, like in schools, like you can't do this work by yourself. You can't be like, don't come into education or try to be an educational leader because you want to be a superstar. Like it's
Mm.
really about serving, and trying to leave it better than you found it. And to do that, like you can't make suppositions about what's best for a community. Like you need to build connections in that community, and you need to make people need to come up with these solutions together if they're really going to have an impact.
Now, did I see that you've switched to Substack?
Yeah, I haven't been writing as much recently.
Right.
So yeah, I had a website and then Substack came along, so I just play around with that and hoping to get back to now that we started school this week to get back to doing a little bit more of that. I see some of the people that I used to make comments on their blogs on Substack and hoping to start to rebuild some of those networks. Um, yeah, so I am using Substack right now. I think it's a pretty easy resource to use. And one of the things I do on the side too is I work for this group called Ideas in Massachusetts, which
Mm.
we do a lot of work with schools and educators around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and run some anti-racism classes, and so it's a really great model where you have a white educator with a teacher of color, and we co-teach these sessions, and so that's something I've been involved in. So that prompted me to do like a lot of my writing based on, you know, issues that I was seeing around inequity and anti-racism in schools, and um, so just a place to put down my thoughts and again share it with family and my kids, like just to make sure we're having these conversations about things that are happening right now.
And I'd imagine that it's gotten more complicated or there's more attention put on it in the last 6 or 7 months, right? Given nationally the way that currents have been flowing related to, DEI. Is a capital DEI or a small DEI, and like that whole thing, has that affected your work at all?
I think it's impacting everybody's work to
Yeah.
some degree because that work isn't done on behalf of Lexington Public Schools, but
Right.
I think a lot of people are nervous about some of the stuff coming out of the current administration and being careful how they're wording things and reframing, and rightfully so if grant money is going to be tied to things. But I just think, like at the end of the day, like if you and I are having a conversation as two adults that know a little bit about this country, is to understand like this is pushback against progress where, we have equity in our schools, um and we can cite like where these things have happened before, you know during the civil rights movement when we were trying to, desegregate our schools. Like what did some of that where some of the southern states did was they shut down their public schools and all the kids went to private schools and funds got redistributed. And so I just think it's important to have these conversations. One of the the reasons I think that we're in the position we're in as a country is um, we don't study our history, so we don't see that these aren't new things that are happening. But it's not typical that in 50 states that we teach these things explicitly. So
Try to go back to that young man on the oh man, what do you guys call it in the Boston area? Is that the what's the public transit
oh,
there?
but
The,
MBTA or the T, yeah.
yeah, the T. So you're riding home after been in the locker room, and I'm kind of glad you weren't in the Red Sox locker room because I'm a Yankees Padres fan, so we
Okay,
could talk.
that's good. I'm a
We could, are you okay? But so what advice does your current self give that young man who then goes into finds this love for coaching and is like, and then a love for substitute teaching, which said no one ever, right? Like, so like what advice would you give that guy then that you think would make their path either easier or more productive or more fruitful? Because you've learned a lot of lessons, and I'm sure not all easy ones.
Yeah. I mean, part of me, and this seems like a cop out, but I have two answers. Part of me is like, the journey has been the journey, and I've kind of like learned so much at each stop, like even where things don't always end well, but that's reality too. Like, but to be reflective on my own part and why things don't always go well. So I think, I mean, part of it is about like, don't be defensive. Like take some time to like think before responding. But the other part of me might say like, don't be afraid to make a move earlier. I think to know like that being really comfortable isn't always a good thing. So I think, again, I have no regrets, but maybe I shouldn't have stayed at the school I grew up in for so long. But again,
Right.
I loved every minute of it. Maybe not stay in Burlington so long. But again, when I was there, like, it wasn't like I was miserable. So yeah, I just think the number one thing as I get older and I still tell myself is like, just don't react when you feel that the blood boiling. Don't react. Sit in that discomfort. And this is one of the things we talk about too when we're dealing with issues around race. Especially like if I know that I made a mistake in regards to, one of my biases coming out, which one of my implicit biases showing itself and learning a little bit more about myself was just like sit in the discomfort and learn from it. That's the one thing I guess the advice I would give.
Yeah, it's interesting to, as a sports fan, to reflect on even on Jackie Robinson, right? He was obviously a star athlete, but
Yeah.
but he wasn't the only African American star athlete, right? And so the powers that be that kind of selected him for that path realized that the attributes that he had of self-control and just really owning his emotions were as important as the athletic piece.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
him being in situations that you and I will never know, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, like that's the thing. Like even like I remember somebody saying once, and like this is me again as a white guy being oblivious, is like, you know, Jackie Robinson was the first Major League Baseball player. We all know that, but he wasn't the first one that was good enough.
no.
There were still, I mean, um, yeah. So it's yeah, just reframing things sometimes, like the way you thought about things once, like the fact that you can learn something every day in school, like to change it back to that is like that's why I love the job. Like you're never going to go through probably a week. That might be even too long of a time frame, but get to the end of a period in your job in school and be like, I didn't learn something this week.
Right.
It's never going to happen. Like I keep joking, like, oh, coming back for another year, hoping I can get it right this year. And, there's never going to be a year where you get it all right. And that's, I think, one of the things I love about it too.
What's next for you? Because you made a comment about, you have a certain number of, I think you and I are probably on the back nine.
Yeah.
I think I'm ahead of you. But thinking about what's next, and you talked about how the system in Massachusetts is kind of designed. I'm assuming at a certain level, you kind of flatline on your pension contributions and et cetera. We have the same thing in California. I think that's a really short-sighted design that they have actually for the pension because the system loses a lot of valuable institutional knowledge. A 62-year-old today is not a 62-year-old of 50 years ago, but that's a different conversation. What's next for you?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Like I said to my wife, and I've said this in school, so like I can hit that ceiling in 2 more years, like this year and one more. And it's like it's way too soon. I love where I'm at right now. If there's a way to stay longer and I don't want it to be all about finances either. That seems
Right, right.
really, but
Yeah.
I have kids with college debt, and I'm like, so I don't know. Like, if I'm not going to leave if I don't have a plan, but I said I have 2 years to start to, come up with some ideas. I have a good friend of mine, Cale Burke. He's written a couple books. Most recently, like one called Words on the Wall, which is a really great book about schools. And like we all have these mission statements that we put up on the walls and goals and things, but like I don't think we have enough conversations around like what does that look like in action? um, like how do we show evidence that we're really living up to these missions or core values? Like what does that look like if a teacher's doing it, if a student's doing it? Like we just
Yeah.
get these great documents and then like,
Yeah.
oh, we're done. It's
Like lifelong learner.
Yeah, exactly. So he goes around, he works around the globe, like working with schools on making this explicit, making it something they can assess themselves on, and really doing neat things. So like I've talked to him about like, is there a place in that world? Because I love those conversations. When I won this award when I was principal, I think it might have been around 2012 from an ASSP called the Digital Principal of the Year Award. And
Yeah.
so I got to go out and, speak a little bit at different conferences and in different states around the country. I got to go to a conference in England and speak. And I don't need to speak in front of crowds, but I'd like to, it's fine. But I'd rather, if you could build connections with school communities and help support people doing good work, like I think that would be a great option. Um, I would do an interim principal job, but again, that's not the work I want to do where you get to like I'd love to do some more ongoing work, like not just like flyby stuff.
Well, you're very humble about your achievements, and I think the online presence piece and your honest blogging and writing about equity issues, for me, I admire that because as a fellow white guy, um, it's a little tricky when you're a white guy blogging about equity issues. Either you're seen as pandering, or you're seen as that's easy for you to say because you're either part of the problem or you have no idea what the hell you're talking about, right? And so I still see a lot of writing about schools, but there's not a lot of honest perspectives that really go into uncomfortable topics. So I've appreciated that and some of the things I've found that you've written. Yeah.
Again, I want to be clear, like some of these things that I write, I may not know what the hell I'm talking about, but it's my perspective, and I try to, as best I can, keep in mind like what my identity is. I know you started the interview today around
Yeah.
like me giving a little bit of my identity, who I am,
Yeah.
and I think one of the most important things like that we can do as educators, especially white educators working in schools where um, we have colleagues of color and students of color, is understand our identity
Yeah.
and realize like how that impacts the spaces we show up in. I think it's a hugely important question because I remember the first time I was asked, like, how did my race influence, my life? And I was like, what? What do you mean? And then I'm like, oh, snap. Like, that's a problem. So I think it's a great question to start with, like, how does your identity impact, like, how you show up in your classroom? Again, if people nobody, it's an answer that's always at work. That's what I love about it. It's like, it's a work in progress. Like, I'm never going to have oh, that's the A+ answer. Like, that's not the point. The point is to, like, continue to be reflective. Like, for me, not to go off on a tangent, for me, it's like, I have so many years of being oblivious to things that were right in front of me. Like, I'm never going to get where I'd like to see myself, but I'm going to, try. And when I screw it up, I'm going to take responsibility and keep moving forward because it's too important not to.
Have your own kids gone to school in similar schools to the ones you've led?
Um, yeah, I mean, my kids went to school in southern New Hampshire at a pretty large, predominantly white high school. So,
Mm.
so yeah, kind of more similar to what I attended. But we do have a lot of conversations around the dinner table, and I'm fortunate, like despite where they're growing up, they are starting to peel some blinders off. So that's good.
Yeah, it's always an interesting thing to reflect back as we get in middle age or beyond and think about the way we were raised and then the way our own kids are being raised and what their experiences have been like. And um, I always tell my daughter, I have a 23-year-old daughter, and I just tell her, like, I certainly don't have all the answers, but let me tell you about a few mistakes that I made. And the sooner you can learn about this thing and get out ahead of it, then it's going to save you some suffering. And maybe the world will get incrementally better through that process.
I
Yeah.
have a first year teacher as a daughter. She's just started her for so that's yeah. So we have a lot of conversations. I'm fortunate, and she went through a master's program at BU, and she was reading some great stuff. She read um, one of Dr. Bettina Love's books, who is I would highly recommend her work if nobody's seen it. Um, Punished for Dreaming is one of her titles, and I'm trying to remember the other ones, but she's just phenomenal with it. If you ever want to see a good clip about like what it looks like to be um not she doesn't call it an ally, she calls it a co-conspirator. If you ever want to see a good clip on like what it means to be a white person who's a co-conspirator and creating a better place for all of us, just look up Bettina Love, ally versus co-conspirator. It's a great little clip from an interview panel she was on. Um,
Okay.
probably like less than 5 minutes, but just awesome, powerful.
That's great. Thank you for that. You've been very generous with your time, and I want to honor that. Is there anything that I haven't covered? I have one more question for you, but is there anything that I haven't covered that's been knocking around that you're like, I'd like to mention as the new school year kicks off for you?
I mentioned briefly like my friend Kale's book, and I like looked at we have some great core values in Lexington Public Schools, and two of them that I'm really fond of that I think apply to like some of the work I do with students, and I put them up outside my office yesterday, were we all belong and you are enough. And I really want to have conversations with students this year about what does that look like to them when students uphold that core value of we all belong. Like, what does it look like? It's not one thing, it's a lot of things. So just
Right.
if I could hear students like tell me what they think it looks like, that would be really powerful, I think. So that's one of the things I'm hoping to do this year. And so that's all I would say is like to people, like, you know, find like a goal or a focal point for the year, and try to stay with it. It's not easy because we always get caught up in the minutia of the day to day, and all those aspirations we have fall back because the busy work. But try to find some time for yourself to like stay on that thing that like fills your bucket.
So the last question is a hypothetical. So let's say you have the opportunity to design a billboard on the side of the freeway,
Yep.
or the highway. I can't remember what it's called in Massachusetts. I went to college.
Highway.
It's a highway, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. What does your billboard say about what you believe in?
Yeah, I mean, I do, like, not to make it like too simple, but I mean, I do love that core value is like we all belong, we all belong. And if people like don't feel that way, like I want to try to engage, or if they can't engage, like I don't really want to. I'm not going to give them any energy, because um, I'm just concerned about like the dehumanization that happens when we don't feel that way. Like if it's a group, if it's a religious belief, it's a race that you feel like people don't belong, and you're going to start to use dehumanizing language. it's a deal breaker for me. So I would, that's what I would say. Like, we all belong, like, and have, have some pictures of, diverse groups of people together, but it's a tough time. It's a pretty romantic vision. It's unfortunate that we are where we are right now. So, um, yeah, I just keep it simple. I guess that's all I can do.
Thanks for joining us on the Hangout Podcast. You can send us an email at podcastinfo@proton.me. Many thanks to my daughter Maya for editing this episode. I'd also like to underline that this podcast is entirely separate from my day job, and as such, all opinions expressed herein are mine and mine alone. Thanks for coming on in and hanging out.